Haystack. It's harvest time. So, yesterday, Dr. David A. Falk went on, he's a biblical Egyptologist. I consider him a friend. He went on Inspiring Philosophy the other day, a prominent Christian channel. And he also has his own channel, Ancient Egypt in the Bible. I subscribe to both these channels, even though we have a difference of theology and opinion and belief in some things. And there they went on to debunk the Book of Abraham. And so I know a lot of Latter-day Saints are probably upset that, oh, they're attacking our religion and our beliefs, and they don't understand the things that we do. And, that's all fair, but at the same time, he's a subject matter expert. And I've gone to him to understand quite a lot of ancient Egypt and the historical context that the scriptures were written around. And so I don't think that their conversation or the things that they went over is a bad thing. There are certainly things that we can't account or answer. And so it's not bad to ask the question. So that being said, I love Dr. Falk. I love Michael with Inspiring Philosophy. I think his name is Michael. No, I don't agree with all their subject matter, but I find a lot of value in teaching in the things that they share. It doesn't necessarily mean I believe everything that they're taught, especially when it comes along denominational lines. So, that being said, they have a creedal point of view, which blinds them from a restoration point of view, and we have a restoration point of view, which blinds us from a creedal point of view, and that's understandable. We could be grown-ups and look at that. So there, they reacted to a video from Ward Radio going over the Book of Abraham, and went through debunking it. Now, the thing is that it seemed like they did take a path of least resistance to that there could be more context or understanding given, but I think they just took a very direct no. I do think that they were fair for the most part. And again, Ward Radio does the same thing with other beliefs. So I think it's completely fair. My point of view about the Book of Abraham is the thing that nobody ever talks about, and the thing that you should ask about. For example, the lion couch scene, the facsimiles. These things were developed in the 18th dynasty, probably around the time of Hatshepsut, Queen Hatshepsut. So when I had looked it up, the earliest accounts of these types of drawings, the lion couch scene was about 18th dynasty. So right where it says, written by the hand of Abraham, to me, my understanding isn't Abraham touched these facsimiles and touched these papyri. It's perhaps he was the scribal author, or perhaps it's a Jewish tradition attributed to Abraham. The thing we don't look at when it comes to the Book of Abraham is we're looking at what Egyptians believed about the facsimiles and everything, but we completely neglect to pay attention to the fact that ancient Jews also had borrowed a lot of imagery from the Egyptians, but they didn't have the same belief or interpretation of those things. So they had to reform it to their own theological structure. For example, and even Dr. Falk has admitted this in the past, it's a known thing that Osiris or Abraham has been substituted for Osiris. in some of these coffin texts or funerary practices. So ancient Jews did live in Egypt during the Ptolemaic time, and they used a lot of similar iconography and imagery and practices. So, for example, do we think that when Jacob was mummified, that he didn't have prayers and things written all over him on his coffin? The mummification practice is deeply theological as well. But did Joseph and Jacob have this belief as the Egyptians did? No. In fact, during that time, they're living around the Oh, people are commenting. Hello from Poland. Hello from Ohio. Hello, guys. No, Jacob and Joseph were likely around during the second intermediate period, the Hyksos period. They would have learned writing and drawing, father to son, all the way from Abraham, who Dr. David A. Falk has also talked about this, is more likely than not a son of Teru of Urkesh, as Terah, the biblical father of Abraham. This is something that they've talked about on their channels, so I'm sure that they could agree there. But Abraham, sorry, I have a splitting headache. But Abraham would have been taught some scribal arts, would have gone down father to son, but would they have the same belief system attributed to everything? Even to the point of Jacob and Joseph being mummified in an Egyptian practice. But how did they recontextualize it for their own theological and religious belief? We don't ask that question because that did exist. So perhaps that's the question we should ask. So that's where I'm coming from. Not to mention, one of the first things Dr. Falk said to me about the Book of Abraham when we talked last year is he said it's written like a Semitic text, not an Egyptian text. The grammatical structure, how everything is formed, and that makes sense. So he said it's not Egyptian. It must be, he must be copying a biblical or a Bible platform or structure. Because his background is, well, obviously Joseph Smith made everything up or just copied it. Had a very keen mind. Whereas for me, he's coming from a Semitic background. He's trained in all the scribal schools, has a different practice. The Jewish language takes on it's a Semitic framework, even in written language. They did borrow Egyptian characters. We see that in like Hezekiah's seal. They have an Ankh symbol in it. But did it mean the exact same thing that Egyptians meant by it? I don't know. But Jews did in fact borrow from Egyptians. In fact, Dr. David A. Falk's book, which I would highly recommend, is the Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context, an illustrated journey. He illustrates very well how the Ark is very symbolic of the Egyptian 19th dynasty style solar bark that you typically would carry, the idol of a god from one place to another. In fact, look at that this way. Semitic belief. The bark or the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark, the boat, brought Noah and his family to a new land, a new place, under a covenant, and then spread out. And I think that Ark, that solar bark, that covenant structure and practice and imagery stuck with it, with ancient peoples. So we see, like Ra is on a solar bark, the sun is the solar bark, and it sails across the sky. One remark he made is, in the Book of Abraham, those pillars are not pillars of heaven. It's just, he's saying it's water. That's why there's a crocodile in it. But at the same time, I've seen that I don't have the reference. Obviously, I'm doing this off my phone live. But we see how the solar bark is in the heavens. It's in the sky, right? And we know that even Sobek in the theology, was cast to go into the Nile, into the waters, into the depth, and he manufactured a net, and he goes and gathers up. We know that the 4 sons of Horus, part of their practice, part of the belief of what they do, is they go into the afterlife, the heavens, the sky. Not quite the sky, but it's the sky. The heavens is also defined as an ocean of sorts. And they go help and gather lost souls and help usher them into the afterlife, into that field of reeds, which is fed by the Nile, fed by heaven, sky. So I think there's connections there that I think he knows, but because of the context of what they're speaking about, he doesn't feel like it's even worth making that connection. But that's my opinion, and I'm not an expert. I just know what I've read, and I can remember some of it. So there's a couple things that I think could have thrown a bone to, right? And their job is not to throw a bone to it, but if we're looking at it in its complete context, I think there is more to understand there. And so, like I said, some of the imagery comes from different periods. In fact, was it the lion couch scene? Now, there's one of them that's a spell that typically you put on the tomb, and it's a protection from the tomb. Maybe it is the lion couch scene. And it's protection over the tomb. The way it's used with the Book of Abraham is it's saying it's like a protection. It's illustrating how Abraham was protected from death, not just a physical death, but also a spiritual death. So that's the way I personally understood it, not knowing everything there. And so to me, seeing how Jews had migrated back and forth, I wouldn't be surprised that even if the famine stela, which talks about not Potiphar, Imhotep, the vizier Imhotep during the Old Kingdom, he's basically forgotten. But then they have this famine stela, and I think it's over by Elephantine, where there's a Jewish population. And they take a story that is eerily similar to Joseph. There's a lot of parallels there. But then they attribute it to the vizier Imhotep and deify Imhotep as a new Egyptian god. So this is the first time they've taken a mortal man and hundreds, thousands of years later, deified the person. And I think part of that was because there was an existing remembrance or knowledge of the story of Joseph. And so perhaps this was an Egyptian priest's propaganda thing to go and try and repurpose history, rewrite history. That's my own speculation. It makes sense. That's the motive is there. The pattern of the type of thing that they do is there. And it would make sense. So, because that famine stela was not written during the time of Imhotep, it was written much later when there was a Jewish population there. A Jewish population which also borrowed Egyptian iconography. So, one thing I wish we could see is someone like Dr. David A. Falk go over the Egyptian, how Jews reinterpreted, repurposed Egyptian iconography. Because we know that they did, but nobody talks about it. So I think that would be some due diligence. That's fair to go through, and I think it helps us understand ancient Egypt, ancient Israel. I mean, you have a prophet in vision who has a reed in his hand and is told to go measure the temple with the reed. And they do have an Egyptian kind of background context of things. Hi, Betty. And so seeing them use a reed when the Egyptian theology about eternity is a field of reeds, an eternal field of reeds. And here you have a prophet being told by God, or an angel of God, to measure the temple which connects earth and heaven. It's eternity. You're taking a reed of eternity and measuring eternity with it. To me, I feel like there's some significance there. So there is a lot of Egyptian influence in Jewish culture. And I think if we put more attention on that, questions in the Book of Abraham will start to find answers. And the thing is it's okay to ask those questions. So Latter-day Saints should not be offended by Michael and David's video on this. They have a creedal background, not a restorationist background. They're going to see things differently. That's okay. You take truth where it comes from, and you build off of it. We can't be so hardened. Like, we accept Christ, right? So you love, forgive, learn, grow, refine. And I think that's the message that Latter-day Saints should take from Dr. Falk and David's presentation on debunking the Book of Abraham. Because to me, they haven't debunked it for me, but they have gone through and shined a light on some things that perhaps we should ask questions about. In the end, is it pertinent to our salvation? Probably not. The thing is that we do things in the temple that we see done in the ancient world. Except the ancient world has more of a myopic view and application for these things. They say, okay, well, we'll take this ordinance or this practice, this prayer, this spell, is how they would say it, their spell. They'll inscribe it on a tomb. That'll be protection for the body, protection for the soul, and the afterlife. Kind of reminds you of things in the temple. Key words, things. But instead of the afterlife and it just being tacked on for us for the afterlife, what we have is covenants that we commit to live by to help guide us through our mortal life, that then allow us to be bound and have a destination in the hereafter. It secures our destination, because what we're doing in this life is refining our character to become more like God. We don't believe ourselves to be pets of God, but rather potential gods in embryo that we may become. He's still our Father, right? And the Savior is still our Savior. And without them, we can't achieve or work our way into heaven or any of that. They've, by their grace, have given us the opportunity to change, to become more. So that's where I stand on that. And again, I love Michael. I love David. I'm still subscribed to those guys. So continue, listen to them. Don't be offended. Choose not to be offended. And have a good day.